This is the NQ80 Daily, and today we're talking about the Newcastle United takeover. Blockbuster report in the Telegraph this week, unveiling some of the secrecy and details behind the takeover. I'm with Tom. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Ready to get into this fun
Very
little
good.
jaunt.
Absolute rogues gallery of shysters and dirty dealing liars, and that's just Boris Johnson. So, wow. Okay, so this is a story by Gordon Rayner in the Telegraph. He's an editor there. What a scoop this is. So he's managed to get hold of WhatsApp messages between Amanda Staveley. If you remember, she was a fixer. She was the face of Newcastle United's takeover for a while, now no longer part of the club. Yasir Al-Rumayyan, who is the Newcastle United non-exec chairman now, but also the governor of the Public Investment Fund. The Crown Prince, an anonymous source, who is, I hope he's got to safety somewhere and doesn't meet a bonesaw. So
I know, right?
Because, he's on the Saudi side, clearly. Absolutely great story. Go check it out. But we're just going to talk about what this means. And I guess the key point about this was that the Premier League had blocked the deal for some time. So it's £305 million takeover from Mike Ashley of Sports Direct fame. And the Premier League had blocked the takeover, ostensibly because the Saudis have been pirating content from beIN Sports, the Qatari state broadcaster. And because the Saudis and the Qataris hated each other at the time the blockade was on, and so on and so on and so on. And this delayed the deal for well over a year. And then there were also concerns about whether this was actually a Saudi state takeover, not a public investment stunt. Anyway. So they gave the term was legally binding assurances that the PIF was not a state body, which everyone knew was nonsense. But
which also came out in a US court, I think, a year later when they tried to take over Live Golf, that they actually were related to each other.
Yes. Well, they argued the opposite at the time, that it was a public body and therefore the US government can regulate them, and they had some kind of immunity from prosecution. Anyway, like the double speak and the double dealing in this is absolutely incredible. So what do the WhatsApp messages say? They're basically they're between the bodies. They're Amanda Staveley messaging between HE, so His Excellency Yasir Al-Rumayyan, the PIF governor who would become non-exec chair at Newcastle, a third party who's clearly given these WhatsApp messages over, who's just like anonymous source in this, and they're relaying messages back and forth between Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. It's effectively an absolute monarchy, and just going back and forth about the deal. Just brilliant stuff, great insight.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's an incredible scoop about such. I was going to use the word terrifying. I think I am going to use the word terrifying kind of stance on, and also microcosm of what is happening across the world in sport, because this isn't just Newcastle that is applying to. We've seen, like I say, the takeover of Live Golf, where the whole sport has been cut into two. Boxing, where Saudi in a lot of ways feels like it's running boxing right now.
It basically owns it. Yeah, I mean, boxing's always been sort of controlled by money anyway, because there's 4 governing bodies, but they've just come in, created Riyadh season, and it's like kind of unified the whole thing, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like the world governing body now is the Saudi governing body in boxing right now, and then we've obviously seen it. I think that they've moved into there's been some movement into tennis. There's been some movement into rugby. They've seen these institutions, or in some cases sports, and especially like weak institutions like Newcastle, and weak institutions, weak sports like golf, especially, was in at the time, because the PGA Tour was in a real mess, especially with like player contracts and player rights. And Phil Mickelson was one of the people that was approached by Liv and Greg Norman, and obviously they've got loads of the mega stars, and they've seen these weak institutions and then pounced upon them. And it's super scary how incredibly easy it has been for them to take over. And I think for me, the scariest part is that, and this is why I used the one, was fearful of using the word terrifying at the start, but actually I think the word is right, is because the scariest thing is the soft power and what that can grant a state, and what it's, I think the comparison that I kind of use now when I think about soft power is the Israeli lobby. If you look how powerful the Israeli lobby is in America, and how powerful it is in the UK, especially when the US elections coming up now, you see that Kamala Harris is very, very reluctant to criticize Israel too much. Obviously, Starmer's doing exactly the same in the UK right now. And we're seeing a mass genocide happen in Gaza. And I know some people get annoyed at us to not talking about the Israeli-Palestine thing. And finally, I guess I can bring it up right now because it is related to what we're talking about. Israel is getting away with a mass genocide in Palestine. And that's because almost entirely down to soft power. The problem, the scary thing is considering how much of an authoritarian state Saudi is. They killed a Jamal Khashoggi in 2018, I think it was, and basically got away with it. And Mohammed bin Salman was also a key orchestrator in that, and public executions going up year upon year. And they've got away with bombing Yemen to basically bits. Like, this is what can happen when you let soft power completely dictate your politics. And this is exactly what has happened in this state as well, because Boris Johnson denied all, said that the Saudis haven't, and this was in the messaging as well, that the Saudis haven't contacted the government. There's been no government interference. And we saw from the messages that they have. And it shows that the tentacles of the Saudi state are in the government. And we knew that already, but this is just perfect proof for it.
The line between soft power and hard power is sometimes hard to find, isn't it? So the difference between, you brought up Israel and the US, there are two organizations, AIPAC and the ADL, who are effectively lobby shops. That's perfectly acceptable, right? Many countries do this kind of thing. The British government for many years had outposts in all its consulates, like funding local arts and stuff like that. This is a soft power game.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So
all governments do it. The Saudis and the Israelis look a little different in their organization of their activities, and one of the key differences is how far away the Saudis are from the soft power activities, how far the central government is, and of course it's an authoritarian government, so it's quite centralized, and in just a few people, actually, because bin Salman had all his rivals locked up in a hotel for months, and then a bunch of them disappeared to be found who knows where, somewhere in the desert, I presume. But it does buy you a lot, and I think the wider context is quite important here. I guess the only surprise about this story is that Adam Crafton didn't break it, because he'd broken the previous one where a bunch of government emails that showed the Boris Johnson and his personal private secretary basically organising all of this. And so why does it matter? Because in the end, the football governance bill, the white paper that didn't go all the way through Parliament, wasn't voted on, didn't become an act because the Tories ran out of time, basically showed a carve out for foreign policy interests of the UK government, right? So saying, hey, well, if our friends, the Qataris, who we buy a lot of liquid natural gas off, or the Saudis, who we buy a lot of oil off and sell them arms, if they'd like to be part of these sports, well, we're going to give away the integrity of the Premier League in return for our foreign policy interests. And what are those foreign policy interests? Well, they move with the political winds, don't they? So when you bring up, lobbying groups on behalf of one country, or in the case of PIF, many investments in the UK. So I get a lot of pushback, I'm sure you do as well, when we bring this up, saying, hey, if you ever used Heathrow, because the Qataris own part of that, or ever bought something in Sainsbury's, or if you ever taken an Uber, because Saudis have an investment there. We're on Twitter all the time. The Saudis are the largest single investor in Twitter, right? And unfortunately, it's very hard to get away from late stage capitalism, isn't it? The tentacles are very, very deep. But it's part of a strategy, and part of that strategy, not the whole, but part of it is to build soft power, leading to hard power through sport. And the Saudis in particular have been very, very good at this, but they're not the only ones. And the amazing thing about this WhatsApp message is it kind of confirms what we knew along, that there was direct contact between the government, the Saudi government, the Public Investment Fund of the Crown Prince, Amanda Staveley, the fixer, and Mike Ashley, who she was also communicating with on the other side, right? So they were all combined in this deal, and everybody lied and told us that they weren't coordinating this, and they were. And I guess that kind of leads to a question, doesn't it? What happens now? Now that we know that we were lied to, and that the key thing, hey, these things are separate, is not true, do we revisit this?
But nothing will happen. Nothing will happen. What I think what we're doing is important to speak about this and keep it alive, and all of the media publications need to keep this alive as much as possible. But the thing is I'm just completely resigned to it. To me, it just feels like nothing is going to happen regarding this, and I don't almost see how it can, because it feels like the Premier League of battling on fighting on so many fronts right now, the Man City thing in particular, and it feels like I imagine the people on the board there at the Premier League and the people running it are like, do we really want to revisit this again? We've seen that the Labour government is toothless as hell, and basically the same guys as before in red ties almost. Like they're so toothless. They're so similar to what's been gone before. They will follow the money as well. Like if they see the potential money coming from, like you say, the weapons sales in Saudi, and the fact that we might get cheaper oil from Saudi, they're not going to get involved in this. The problem is with the UK, and it's been this way for so long, is that basically since Thatcherism, that it's based upon this economy which is so short-sighted. It's so short-sighted, and it's left us in this position that we're in today, where the whole of the country and public services are basically complete, well, for want of a better word, fogged, because we've always looking 1-2 years ahead. How can we make short-term money? How can we make short-term gains? And by taking the money from Saudis, by being in bed with the Israelis, by being in bed with the Qataris, it brings in that short-term money, but then it just fucks the whole country up as well. And like we talked about, like the tentacles are just involved, and they're directing the heads, they're directing the brains of everyone that's there, and that's why I just can't see why this groundbreaking news that we basically knew was the case already. We've seen Mohammed bin Salman at F1, for example. We've seen him talk about how basically if it's I think there was the interview he did with Fox News, I think maybe a year or two ago, where they put to him the question of sports washing, and he said, well, if sports washing is going to grow like my GDP by a percent, then yeah, call it sports washing as much as you like. He doesn't give two shits about this, and I don't think the politicians of the UK give two shits about it either, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, as we've said before, I think sports washing is not a broad enough term, really. I mean, clearly soft power is a better way of thinking about this, because it opens doors. You know, the Premier League is, as everyone says, is a fantastic product, and exported to nearly 200 countries. And being part of that is an incredible media opportunity, which basically nothing else buys you, right? So it opens doors in number 10, as we know. And it's not just the Premier League, of course. It goes hand in hand with weapons and oil and energy and politics and security and safety and so on, right? So, and these things all tie together. The question I asked about, would anything be done? Well, look, in a sense, the Premier League's a private club, right? So they can make their own rules. As long as they comply with UK law, then they can make their own rules, right? As we saw in the recent associated party transactions case that the Manchester City brought to a binding tribunal, the tribunal said, yeah, these things probably don't comply with competition law, but you needed it to get this other thing, PSR, working, and that does comply with competition law. So the Premier League, I think, could just say, hey, the rules we have are ... and they could include no state governments who don't comply with whatever human rights records we like, or whatever it is, right? That was the carve out, by the way, in the white paper for the football governance bill that everyone was particularly worried about. Or the Premier League adopted, the Premier League adopted new rules on what was appropriate human rights, but they were aligned to the UK sanctions list, which has got nothing to do with human rights and it's entirely political, right? So the UK sanctions government, it's fighting with in one way or another, geopolitically, and it's not about like, hell, here are the grades. You've got an A+ on human rights, great. You're Denmark, AZ, you're, I don't know, the UK or something. The Premier League could do that. They're a private body and a private club saying these are the rules. And, I think the best thing that could come out of the 115 charges case is the Premier League just says, hey, look, we've had enough of this. No more state-run clubs. And here are the rules around that. There has to be clear separation. It has to go into blind trust, whatever. Or even better, has to be sold off. That would take the government to do that, I think. Like they did with Chelsea. Government just said, no, you're sanctioned, sell it. By the way, that $2.5 billion that was paid by Clearlake and Todd Bowley to Roman Abramovich is still sitting in the UK bank account and has not been but used for the people of Ukraine, as Roman Abramovich promised it would be. So, I think that would be the best outcome, basically. No more state. In fact, I would swap, and I know this is like fantasy, but I'd swap any punishment against Manchester City for their past discretions for just no state ownership. Just sell it off. Yeah. And they sell it off to whatever private equity company, and they just have to be run like any other club.
I think that, that would 100% be the ideal scenario. But the thing, like you say, with the Premier League using the sanctions list as evidence, the Premier League doesn't exist in a silo, and they might be making their own decisions to on the rules of their business and the rules of the competition, but they are run by very similar types of people who have many friends in government and in the higher echelons of business, and it's for me it just seems like it's impossible to kind of divorce the two, and they might be completely separate and they might be to their own rules and stuff, but the fact that there are links between the two just means that it just will not happen, because the strength of Saudi and the strength of Qatar is way too big, and the people who are basically running the country and run these types of organizations just don't care enough, to be honest. And that's what it feels like to me, because it's a moral decision, essentially. At the end of the day, it's a moral decision what they are doing. You could argue, I guess, that the rules of the competition and the integrity of the competition can be at risk from these state clubs. However, there's no evidence that has happened yet.
Well, and therefore City winning every year, but yeah.
But you can't. Well, obviously, like there are loads of reasons why City keep winning every year. The money being one massive thing, and the other thing being the cheating. But I mean, billionaires. It would almost be like you could remove billionaires from the thing, because there are rules in place. But it feels like the state thing is a moral decision. And to me, like, the Premier League are too morally bankrupt for that, and obviously the government made it. That's what it feels like to me. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, and money's involved, actually, because the Premier League is a collection of clubs, 20 clubs, right? There's an administrative function, but it's not separate from the clubs, really. So the administrative function does what the clubs want. The owners, I think, without any proof of this, like the fact that it is open to state purchases, because that gives them a very good exit pathway. Yeah. And given that about half the clubs in the Premier League and now have US owners, and many of those are effectively private equity groups, companies who would like an exit at some point, that is why close off a market pathway to exit, right? So there's the money side of things, there's the soft power side of things, there's a political intervention, and all right, complicated, but just a great story in the Telegraph today with lots and lots of details. The kind of stuff the Telegraph used to break all the time before they became a culture warrior shop.
What is very interesting as well, because I think it's Oliver Brown at the Telegraph. He went to a box. He wanted to go to Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois. I think it was that fight.
And they wouldn't let him in.
And they wouldn't let him in at the Telegraph. So I wonder I don't know if those two are linked or anything, but obviously. Yeah.
Well, he'd been critical. Mind you, he's a snooty twat, isn't he, Oliver Brown? So
oh my God.
I would lock him out of anything just for the sake of it.
Yeah, and he really fucking the way that he kind of used that story and stuff. He I understand I'm siding with you, but I really don't want to be on your side here because you're a slimy piece of work. He wrote, what did he write a couple of weeks ago? He was writing about football on something. I think it was I think he wrote about Thomas Tuchel, and it's some very xenophobic.
I think you could just guess any position he takes.
Exactly.
What was Joe Barton saying today? Oliver Brown is saying it in a more erudite fashion.
Just one of the other things I just want to say before we finish is that when this type of shit comes out, and also we didn't even mention Ant and Dec were also on the Saudi payroll, that they were lobbied to say that this is a great thing for Newcastle as a city.
It's too far for me. Ant and Dec, they bought Ant and Dec.
That was the last straw. But like, if you're a Newcastle fan reading this, you're a Newcastle fan seeing this, and you're using all this, like you say, like, oh yeah, they're part of Disney, they're part of Twitter, you're using your iPhone, blah blah blah. Like, I just don't understand how they can't have integrity. They can't have like some type of moral compass and be outraged about this. But for them, like, all that matters is the points. All that matters is the wins. And it's like that. I think that's one of the saddest things in all, really, because like working class people, we should be sticking together and like we can't trust the governments, we can't trust organizations, we can't trust businesses, we can't trust authoritarian states, but like as people together we should be able to come together in these moments of strife. And fucking Newcastle as a city, basically the people and even their two prodigal sons, Ant and Dec, have completely sold their lives to their whole souls to this.
Look, as did half the United fan base, it felt like, when the Qataris were beating. In fact, without naming names, there's some prominent fans who were at Fans Forum last week who had big hard-ons for the Qataris taking over. We know they paid certain fan channels and ex-United players to be part of their. And again, fine, this was a campaign, wasn't it? Turns out they never really had a chance if you look into all the documents. But the point stands. Like, there were many United fans who just saw the dollar signs, pound signs, and said, "Yeah, we'd like that. That feels like it will guarantee us more chance of victory."
And it shows what a force football is. And this is why in the first place they buy into it, because they can weaponize people, and also they can just sports wash and whitewash their whole reputation. It's one of the many reasons why they're doing it.
All right, I'm off to go buy a football club on an island somewhere, and I'll catch you soon, Tom.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone.